Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's extra special presentation, Operational Resilience, the Relationship Between Risk and Resilience, brought to you by ClearRisk. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out today to join this event. My name is Hind Fayyad, and I'm a ClearRisk Marketing Coordinator. If anyone in the audience is unfamiliar with ClearRisk, we are a risk management software provider based in St. John's, Newfoundland, Canada. The goal of our solution is to enable success through risk optimization. We offer a comprehensive tool to help customers take control of their risk programs, providing visibility into all information relevant to claims, risk, and insurance. Data-driven technology is essential when facing the challenges of today's risk landscape. ClearRisk's cloud-based risk management system provides visibility into claims, incidents, policies, assets, transactions, contracts, and more. Streamline incident reporting, analyze data with custom reports and dashboards, integrate with third-party systems, and even track pandemic spread, all from one centralized system. We all know that the risks are constantly evolving, and adaptation is key to our business's survival. As with all our webinars, the goal for this session is to provide relevant and educational content that can be applied easily in your careers. This webinar is for risk managers, finance managers, executive leaders, resilience professionals, or anyone who wants to make their business more resilient. We're so excited to have an insightful and experienced panel of resilience and risk leaders speaking today, who are also the three co-founders of the Resilience Think Tank. First, we have Ashley Gooseman, MBCP, MBCI, who has coordinated many high-profile crisis incidents ranging from pandemics, floods, earthquakes, hurricanes, severe winter weather, tornadoes, power network outages, and terrorist incidents. Some examples are her work on the American Red Cross September 11 recovery program and the Hurricane Katrina, Massachusetts operation. She founded DisasterEmpire.com in 2019 and now works as a risk manager at Liberty Mutual, specializing in helping employees, enterprise-wide response to crisis events, and preparing for business interruptions globally. We also have Lisa Jones, MBCI, MBCP, with over 14 years of experience promoting resiliency and elevating contingency planning visibility. She's a gifted communicator and insightful leader, having led programs within the healthcare, higher education, and life sciences manufacturing industries. Currently, Lisa is leading business continuity and disaster recovery planning initiatives with Tele-Ion Consulting as a senior BCDR consultant. She also serves as the president for Business Continuity Institute's USA chapter. Finally, we have Mark Hoffman, an award-winning business continuity, risk, and resilience consultant. Mark won the Business Continuity Institute's Global Consultant of the Year award in 2021. He's a frequent contributor to the industry with clients in Canada, the United States, and Caribbean, and across Europe. Mark is also a ClearRisk partner and has been working with ClearRisk on the development of an exciting new business continuity module, which is available now for demo at clearrisk.com. Mark also hosts the Resilient Journey podcast, which is available on all podcast streaming platforms. Today, these professionals will discuss some important topics, including an introduction for risk and financial leaders on how business continuity management is evolving towards resilience, an open conversation on how risk management and resilience can support each other, and tips on leveraging already available information to maximize value to your organization. Before we dive in, I want to go over some housekeeping items. Because this is an online event, let me start by outlining some of the engagement features of this webinar platform. First of all, we encourage you to leave comments or reactions in the chat on the right of your screen. Feel free to introduce yourself in the chat and share where you're joining us from. We love to hear it. One of our work term students, Andrew, will be moderating the chat during this event and will be happy to engage with you all. Just a gentle reminder that your comments are publicly visible to everyone in this room, both during and after the webinar. Our panel will be happy to answer any questions you have. Please submit your questions by clicking the Ask a Question button at the bottom of your screen. If someone already asked a question that you really want to see answered live, you have the ability to upvote that question to push it further up the list. If you accidentally ask a question in the chat, have no fear. We will make sure they make it onto our question list. We have allocated time at the end for Q&A, but if time runs short, we'll reach out after the webinar to make sure everyone gets an answer. We've also added a few questions under the polls button at the bottom of your screen. We encourage your participation throughout the session. Finally, as I've already mentioned, Mark Hoffman is the host of the Resilient Journey podcast, where he chats with industry leaders about some of the biggest issues facing organizations today. If you would like to learn how to make your business more resilient, click the Join the Resilient Journey button, also at the bottom of your screen. Last but not least, if you have to leave early, want to rewatch this webinar, or share it with colleagues, the link you used to join today will continue to host the recording of the webinar after it's over. Just sign back in the way you did today and start watching. On that note, I would like to invite our panelists to the stage. Welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Hind, and thank you for all of the work that you've done to help put this together and to get us ready. And we wouldn't be here without you. We also just want to say thanks to ClearRisk for sponsoring this and hosting us. One of the things we like about at the Resilience Think Tank is always any chance we get to get out and chat about resilience or business continuity. We're there. Just call us and we'll be happy to do it. And one of the things you said at the beginning there, I really like, because it very much aligns with what we like to do. And you said we like to provide content that can easily be accessed and helpful in your career. And that's exactly what we're about. That's why we're here. Before we get too deep into our content today, bring in Lisa here. Lisa, tell everybody a little bit about the co-founders, the other co-founders of the Resilience Think Tank.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm Lisa Jones, and when we thought about this think tank, we brought some similar thought processes together, and it's really started out as just a journey of a conversation, similar to the conversations that everyone is having within our profession about, how do we elevate business continuity? What are some of the things that you have implemented? What are some of the things that we feel that members or professionals are really missing in our profession, in our industry? How can we take it to the next level? So the six of us, myself and Ashley, Mark, and those who are not here, James Green, Andres Bryant, and Melina Maniva. I always say her last name wrong. We started with just a conversation, and from there we've moved to really put together something that we feel people will want to hear. A place where the team of one can get some information and content. We are a global think tank, so as you can see, we're on the East Coast in North America, but we have friends in Europe, and we are really looking forward to what we can do to elevate and give back to our profession.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm bringing Ashley now too. Just take a minute and talk about the mission of the think tank.
Yeah, I think as both of you were alluding to, we really want to assist our peers, really help those organizations that those of you that are BCP or resilience or risk of one, but are asked to really cover many hats, whether that's DR, business continuity, crisis management, risk management, etc. That is very important to us, and we really want to bring you timely, relevant information as we move forward. I think one of the great things about what we're doing is really working to be independent on your behalf. And so really making sure that we're keeping our pulse on what's going on and trending within our fields, whether that's overall resilience, business resilience, which really is our focus. But additionally, we have our pulse on personal resilience aspects as well. And we'll have more to share on that as we go forward. Either Mark or Lisa, anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that's good. Why don't we jump right into sort of the main reason we're here? And I know a lot of people that are on the call today are very familiar with business continuity, but let me just take a couple of minutes at the onset here and lay the foundation for some of you who might be joining maybe from another discipline. Maybe your focus is more on risk management or finance or something else. So just kind of lay the foundation for business continuity. Also, just a reminder I put in the slide here, don't be afraid to ask us questions. We want to hear from you. We want this to be interactive. We'll probably do the questions at the end, but please feel free to ask questions. So when it's done right, business continuity really addresses how your organization is going to continue to function, how you'll continue to operate, how you'll continue to stay productive in response to some type of a business disruption. Many of you might feel like we've been kind of living through BCP for the last couple of years. And to a degree, I think that's right. I think at the onset of the pandemic, organizations didn't realize that in some cases they even needed business continuity. And they found themselves adjusting on the fly and trying to get their teams up and running and able to work remotely. But some disruptions don't give warning. Sometimes we run into situations, for example, where you can come to the office and find that you're the victim of a major cyber attack against one of your core systems. Or you could suddenly hear that one of your key suppliers has gone bankrupt, or maybe they had a cyber attack. You could lose your facility for any number of reasons. So business continuity works with your business leaders to identify those critical functions, those key dependencies, the resources that you need, and it establishes strategies to allow those functions to continue or resume as quickly as possible. In traditional business continuity, we gather information about the business. We use what we call a BIA, a business impact analysis, and we use that data to build those strategies and to build those plans, which get enacted if something goes sideways. Now, traditionally, business continuity has been somewhat of a reactive process. There's a disruption, we go to the plan, we execute the plan to try to keep the business running. But what we're starting to see, and we're going to talk about this as we go through today, is a more proactive approach in the industry. There's one other thing I want to call out, and it's pretty important. It's something that's been interesting. We talked about it across the think tank, and different people that we've talked to, we're finding something we have in common. And that is most of us either fell into this or were shoved into this profession without really necessarily giving it a whole lot of forethought. So if you're new to business continuity, don't panic. We've all been there. That's why we're here as the think tank, because we want to help people grow in their skills and help advance in their career. So yeah, we've been there too. Lisa, Ashley, anything else you'd like to throw in there about some foundational items of business continuity?
No, I think you covered it really well, Mark.
All right. So, as I said, we're seeing a more proactive trend. Business continuity, I think, is evolving. We're hearing more and more now about this word resilience. Lisa, I'll get you to jump in here. Describe what you're seeing in that evolution and talk about how that traditional business continuity that I just kind of painted, how that contributes to being more resilient.
Well, and I have been, I would say privy. I don't know if necessarily that's the necessary word, but since I've been in this profession, to see how business continuity has evolved from just being traditional BC to resilience. As many on this phone call or may or may not know, business continuity is kind of a grew out of DR. We started with just planning for mainframes and alternate locations, but and also business continuity was just something that people saw as just something to tick a box as an audit requirement. But we've really come a long way from there. We are now less of something that's just nice to have and more of something that companies are really need to be viable. We see that throughout this pandemic, which I'm so tired of talking about, but we'll get through it. But it's become very necessary to have some type of planning in place to be able to pivot. Our plans now come from being less traditional 100-page Bibles that people never read to become more actionable, something that can be real time used within a disruption or event. And as we've seen, people have used their plans, when done properly, have been able to use their plans throughout this pandemic, been able to pivot, whether it was a supply chain issue to getting more computers for people to work remotely. So we've seen that shift from being something that sat on the shelf to something very viable and actionable. We also saw with the adoption of different standards and regulations that business continuity is definitely required in order for you to just meet the standards and those audits that we constantly go through. From an organizational perspective, these things need to be in place. So I have been elated the fact that we are coming to the forefront. Companies that bought in early understand and have matured their programs, and companies and organizations that are just realizing our importance. I'm more happy to help them. So.
No, that's good. And we talked about resilience being used as kind of a buzzword. It gets even a little bit more complex than that, Ashley. We talk about two other words that come up a lot, operational resilience and organizational resilience. And there's some confusion in the industry as to what all of these terms mean. Shed some light on it for us.
Yeah, absolutely happy to do so. I think when we're talking about resilience, it's great to think about it in this holistic way, but also in the specific way. So in the holistic way, I really see for business resilience, organizational resilience. And that really is looking at the organization as a whole altogether. And so when we're talking to senior leadership, when we're talking to managers, even down to the line managers, they really want to understand that the entire enterprise is really able and ready to absorb incidents when they happen, to be able to bounce back and have that elasticity or plasticity overall. And it's beyond just the business continuity spectrum that we often talk about, but they're really looking at it from an angle of the operational day-to-day pieces, as well as the overall business risk, depending on what your industry is, that you could be at threat from an interruption or from a crisis event, regardless of what that is. So it really is about being adaptable and being able to bounce back and come back. And that really is resonating with the organization. And then when we think about operational resilience, that's a bit of a deeper dive, as I see it, in terms of looking at systems overall and the ability to be able to continue to provide services along the continuum, not only within the organization's functions or processes, but also all of the other pieces along that chain. So that can be equipment, that can be supplies, that can be your third party. All of those pieces are things that you're going to want to look at from a systems perspective for operational resilience, so that you have an understanding not only of what you do, as we talk about from the business continuity perspective, when an interruption or outage occurs, but also you're better prepared and you have an understanding of your tolerances for when things do happen. So I think it's really great, and I'm seeing a lot of synergies. And yes, there are some distinct differences. But certainly to me, everything goes together in a whole. But I see those as the two main distinctions between talking about organizational or operational resilience.
So I always like to talk in terms of analogies. I don't know, maybe it just helps me understand it better. So I'm going to try one here. Now, you haven't heard this yet, and maybe I'm wrong, and call me out if I'm wrong. So let's think of a vehicle that has a flat tire. Business continuity would be you go to the trunk and you get the spare and you put it on. Operational resilience would be maybe you have two sets of tires on the vehicle and you get a flat tire in one and you're still able to function. But that doesn't address organizational resilience. It still doesn't protect the entire vehicle. It just protects that one component. I don't know. Do you love it or hate it?
I think it's okay, Mark. I think
Okay.
we can build that out a little bit more, but it's definitely one way to think about it. Yeah, between the purpose built of the tires or the brakes or the transmission, right? Those are all, we could look at that as specific functions to make that entire vehicle go. But, I think from a business continuity standpoint, we're usually looking at the high level pieces of that. We might not be looking at the paint color, right? The regulations of operating the car, those are other pieces that the business as a whole would be looking at from a risk management perspective in terms of their risk register. And that's where I think the synergies of really working together, which I know we're going to get into talking about, are really important.
Lisa, do you want to throw any rocks at my analogy?
I would love to see that car with the alternating tires. Then that's one less tire I have to change.
That's right. And what's interesting is for organizations that don't have a business continuity plan, it's like they're driving without the spare tire. Or for organizations that have a plan but have never exercised it and really don't know where it is, it's like you got the spare tire but you don't know how to put it on, right? So think about the efficiencies of having all of those things in place and knowing how to use them. All right, Ashley, I'm going to stick with you because as we talk more about being resilient, we talk about the value of collaborating across the organization. You mentioned that it's more than just business continuity. And the Gartner definition of operational resilience starts to get us to think more along the terms of focusing on impacts and connected risk appetites and tolerances and things like that. So it starts to really form a link, a relationship between that business continuity team and the risk management team, for example. So talk a little bit about that relationship and some of the benefits of working together between those two teams.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can give some real world examples, but just to step back a little bit, I think from a business continuity lens, which I started from, you think about, as we've talked about, that reactive piece, and you're worried about the threats that you've identified, or the hazards or perils, depending on your industry, that you've identified from this. But at least in my experience, we weren't thinking as concretely ahead and doing that horizon scanning about really what are the risks that could be impacting us, this year, whether it's a month ahead, this week, or a year ahead. And this is where I'm really seeing resilience, because it has that orientation of thinking about things not just in that reactive, but in more of that proactive sense, and being ready and capable and able to bounce back quickly, that it makes sense that there is a greater alignment between risk and resilience, because those folks and I know many of you may be on the line, when you're thinking from a risk management perspective, as I was speaking to a moment ago, you're going to be thinking about all of the concerns that could be impacting the business, particularly from a business perspective. And I think what is helpful for those of us in the resilience space is really to help to expand that around those hazard pieces and those threats that we could be concerned about. And I think in a real world application of this, I'm participating right now on a weekly basis of getting together key identifiers or key stakeholders from my organization today. And we're working together every week to really think about what are the risks that we could be facing either this week, whether it's, weather, or whether it's something down the line, whether it's a civil unrest that we're concerned about. Everyone has got Russia and Ukraine on their mind right now. So thinking about, political aspects that could impact business, whether it's directly to your organization or to your suppliers. And I really see the value of having that risk lens as we're thinking about future resilience, because it's difficult, right, to really think about how you're able to bounce back or how ready you are to respond to hazards unless you've really made those connections. So I see a ton of synergy, and it just makes sense to me for there to be a connection between risk and the resilience practitioners. But I don't know, Lisa or Mark, if you have anything additional you'd want to add on that.
Lisa, I'll give you a chance to go first.
I totally agree. And specifically when you talk about how working with risk management helps make our plans better. If we're planning in a vacuum, we may not understand that the things that we're planning for are not the true risks that are to the organization. And I'm going to give this this is probably not an analogy, but as far as with COVID, what really was the risk for businesses, hospitality, and restaurants was the fact that people weren't coming to their establishments. I don't know if we would have saw that or they would have saw that if they hadn't truly planned for that and how they had to pivot. If that was part of the conversation from a risk management perspective, they may have been better prepared to pivot to go to online ordering, to make sure they have delivery services. So it's really important that that they could work together and we can work together to ensure that we're planning for what's ahead as well as planning for the now.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I think that it's almost two sides of the same coin, and yeah, so anything I had to add would just be repetitive at this point. I am a little disappointed that when you gave an analogy, it didn't involve trucks or tires, but we can go from there. Lisa, I'm going to stick with you here. We talk about data gathering and when something that we do in the business continuity world and the risk folks do in the risk world. So for example, in business continuity, we know good practices, ISO standards, all of the things talk about doing that business impact analysis to gather the data. And they also recommend that we do risk assessments as part of the business continuity program. But I don't know about where you've been, but the places that I've been, we typically let the business continuity person do the BIA and we let the risk people do the risk assessments. If we're going to build this relationship between these two teams, is that the right way to do it? I don't know. How do you see this data gathering process going?
Well, as organizations look to become more operationally resilient, it makes perfect sense that we combine our efforts and not work against each other. From a BIA perspective, we're collecting that information that really addresses what those impacts are, as well as highlights and identify those critical functions and processes that would need to be protected. And from a risk assessment standpoint, it gives us it points out the threats and helps and puts controls in place that will help to mitigate and lessen the disruptions. But if we again, as I spoke before, if we don't know what those threats are, we're working in a vacuum. I will say that from a business continuity perspective, the risks that we may track may be slightly different from a risk manager and risk management department. That's why I think it's helpful if we work together. Some of the things that we may look at it from a risk perspective may be, okay, we have a single SME on a function or part of a plan. But the things that risk management maybe look at is, the landscape of the vendors that we have and those type of things. So we want to make sure that we're working together to ensure that we are truly protecting our organization to keep them viable.
Another, I think, advantage of that relationship is you're right. We do come across risks, right? And I think you hit on the one that I come across the most, and that is, oh my gosh, we only have one person who knows how to do, this critical thing. And it's good to at least raise that.
Definitely.
Go ahead.
I was just going to add, Mark, in terms of data gathering, I think it's always been a best practice pillar to have risk assessment as part of building your business continuity plans. But I think often we've done it from a site assessment or location assessment in terms of offices for most organizations. And I think although that's going to continue to be important going forward, I think the value of working with the risk officers or risk management team in your company is really, as Lisa said, to understand that additional layer of risk how the business is looking at it from their perspective, and not only from, the workaround strategies or recovery strategies that we would utilize from the interruption. So I really see already a really huge difference in how well prepared I think the organization is becoming, or organizations are becoming as a whole, because they are really bringing in those synergies. And I think for some companies, they may have already done a great job of being or participating in their, risk committees and bringing in business continuity professionals and others to sit at that table. But I think with COVID, the lesson learned is that needs to be a stronger relationship. And then going back to what we were talking about in terms of operational resilience, that is typically where that work is being done today, whether that's, out of the UK with the rules and regulations there. It's usually the risk managers in countries who are leading that effort in terms of operational resilience. So, I think it's happening, and just how quickly we're all coming together on this. But I'm seeing a lot of that work being done, even if it's not being named.
Yeah.
So, Lisa, did you have something?
No, I was just agreeing.
I'm just gonna jump off script here for a quick second and talk about the how to build this relationship, because we talked about a lot of times business continuity folks are that team of one. And so we're looking at, building that collaboration, but there's some unique skills that are involved here. It's not just about understanding what the business impact analysis is, or what a business continuity strategy is, or the data that you have to collect, but there's these soft skills here too, right? The willingness to gain allies and to work with people and to add influence and things like that. Either one of you want to offer any advice on those things?
I think that the first thing that we need to do is just start the conversation. We become so siloed in the things that we do, or single focused on just business continuity. It's okay, A, to ask for help. B, it's okay not to know everything. And I think that's the beauty of what we do, is because we have opportunities to work with so many different people. Now, I will say that in some companies, it's a struggle. It's a struggle to cross over to other departments. And the best thing, or the thing that helps the most, is having someone that's champion for you. Really champion. Even if you start with just the entry level person who will talk to their manager and say the wonderful work that you do, and then the manager may say, okay, let's see what your planning looks like. And as you move up the chain, if it has to be that way, now we all would prefer to be top down, but it doesn't always work that way. So I think as those, we just need to use those soft skills to get the information that we need.
And Mark, I'll just add, there's no I in team. And really what I'm seeing from my practice is that it's all of the products are better. I mean, at the end of the day, I really enjoy that when I'm trying to create something from a business continuity lens, whether it's, for planning or for crisis management or exercising, it's been fabulous to be able to really partner with my risk colleagues to be able to say, hey, actually this has a risk perspective to it. Can you take a look at this? Can you work on this and collaborate with me? And in every single instance, I feel like overall the organization is going to be better prepared because we're taking that extra step and collaborating. And that's really the goal of this, right? That is what boards and senior leadership are asking of us, is to be more agile and nimble, flexible in our approach, so that we are minimizing that downtime, or, absorbing those shocks, and they're not as great as they might have been in the past when we weren't thinking and working together this way.
Yeah, and the byproduct of that collaboration is we're more resilient, because we're advancing both the risk side and the continuity side and the resilience side. I'm going to dive a little deeper here into these two data sets. And one of you mentioned, I can't remember, but somebody said, one of the dangers of this is that the information gets siloed, or the work that we do gets siloed. And to me, it's not so much important as to who actually conducts these data gathering exercises, but that the information gets shared between the two teams. Um, First thing I want to say, though, about this business impact analysis, I don't want you to be misled. I think BIAs have tremendous value. I go as far as to say that if someone doesn't see value in the BIAs, then perhaps maybe they're not collecting the right data, or they're not using the data effectively. The reason I feel that way is because we're getting really good insights from the business directly. This is what's important to me. This is the tool I need. This is the location where I work. I'm dependent on this person or this vendor, or without this, I can't work. And oh, by the way, the impact to the organization is X. And that's key data. But that's all it is at that point, is data. What we need to do is we need to turn it into information. And the way we turn it into information is through the tools that we use and how we use that data. For example, I like to collect things like the minimum business continuity objective and the maximum allowable downtime, whatever phrase you want to use for that. And those are two very important pieces of information. And so we start to understand more about the business. What is it that they need to do and how quickly do they need to operate? But again, not in the silo. And I feel like for most of my career, I've lived in this sort of isolated business continuity silo where I think it would be way more beneficial if I was able to collaborate with the risk team and understand more context. So, for example, when we talk to the business and we say, if you weren't able to operate or if your systems generically were down, talk about the impact. Where instead of, kind of leaves some limited value, I think. Instead, if we were able to say, look, your department faces this very specific risk, or this system that you rely on has these 2 or 3 risks that we know have a major impact if they were to come through. If those risks were to occur, now let's talk about the impact, because now what you're doing is you're making it real for the people that you're talking to. You're not just kind of working with some generic or nameless type of a risk or a threat, where you say, if you lose systems or if you don't have access to the building or something like that. And I think it just makes it a lot more real for people and a lot more relevant. So let me open it up to you, Ashley and Lisa. Have you ever had the opportunity to leverage like a specific risk or data from the risk register when talking to people about business continuity?
This falls under something like risk, it's from the risk registry. So I'll give you an example. Got me? Okay. We were doing a tabletop test with an organization, and we spotlighted that there was no generator at the site. And for some reason, the business or the leadership felt that they could assume that risk. Kind of doubted that a generator was even needed. Not understanding that they had a lot of critical functions and processes within this site, and we bubbled that up and worked really well to really spotlight this generator not being in place. And they chose not to do anything about it and said, that never happens in this organization. It never happens in this area. Within a year, needless to say, they lost power. They lost a lot of things and realized we may need a generator at this site.
Now that you mention it.
Now that you mention it, yeah. So it's very important that, and I truly agree, we work at this existential philosophy or theories when we're doing this business impact. So if systems are down, what do you do? And I think the more that we can make it real to the person that has to answer the questions, the more relatable it can be, and they can really wrap their minds around what the answer should be. We work in this, sometimes we tend to work in this high, medium, low type of thing that doesn't translate well. So anytime we can get, like you said, use a good, take those risks and really give it some legs, it'll just make our planning better.
I love the idea of using a top risk as the scenario in an exercise. That's brilliant. That's really smart.
Yeah,
We're
and
go ahead,
sorry, I was
Ashley.
just going to add,
Okay.
Mark, and I just had an experience last year where, again, working with an enterprise risk management team, I don't think it would be news to anyone that trending risks for most service organizations are really to be able to maintain their employees, whether they're working in an office or whether they're working from home. And so that really bumped up, as we talked about locations being a bit less importance now for many organizations, but that really bumped up the concern around network connectivity as well as, power connectivity and the vulnerability to power outages. And so that was the focus of exercising last year and really bringing in, that coordination between the resilience parts of the organization and the risk parts of the organization. And as you were just saying, Lisa and Mark, to really work on that with the business and get them to really dive down deep and understand what would we do in a catastrophic situation. So I think that's a great deal of value.
Yeah.
I like it. Good stuff. Ashley, I'm going to stay with you, though. We talk about the benefits of business continuity or resilience or anything like that as being maybe even part of the risk team. Have you seen that, and how has that worked out?
Yeah, I think I've been, really fortunate. Business continuity, as we've talked about traditionally, has been that reactive piece. But what I'm seeing more and more is the opportunities for the domain owners, whether that's risk or crisis or business continuity or DR, depending on, again, how your organization segments that or doesn't segment that, but really to come together around that, whether they're calling it resilience or not, that's what they're doing. So there's a great deal of horizon scanning going on that I'm seeing. People are thinking about risk trends, not only from the hazards aspect, but into the business hazards as well, which again, as I spoke to earlier, I think is incredibly valuable. And, this COVID thing is going on, as Lisa was saying, for some time and now into year 3. So, I think it's one of the things that we have to look back on and from our lessons learned from the COVID experience is what I've seen in practice is all of these groups having to come together around this unprecedented impacts from the pandemic. On an ongoing basis, our risk teams are being asked to look at and analyze the data, work with subject matter experts, and trying to forecast not only just in the short term, but in the long term, what the impacts of COVID would be. And that's been full on for 2 years in my experience, along with coordinating with employee safety groups, with security groups, with business continuity. And then, obviously with leadership and down to members of the business to be able to really enable the business to continue to operate effectively. And in the best case examples, we're seeing, a very limited reduction in productivity. And in fact, we're seeing the opposite in most cases, which is excellent. But I think it is, when we're talking about resilience, I think one of the concerns that I have right now is how long we can keep up this pace, because I think people have switched the way that they were most comfortable or used to working into this work from home and remote work style or hybrid work style. And not everyone has really felt that they've been able to take the downtime, even though many people appreciate not having commutes and having work-life balance in some respects. I think we front loaded in terms of the productivity. So I think all of that is really important to look at as we go forward into the new normal. But just to wrap that up, I think it's really been excellent to see all of these groups come together, not for the reason we've had to, but it certainly has been an an experience where I've seen, again, they may not be calling it resilient, but we are being resilient organizations because we've had to pull in all of these partnerships together to respond to this unprecedented event.
So we're starting to run a little short on time, but Lisa, I want to give you a chance to kind of speak about it from the other side. So maybe business continuity doesn't report up through risk. Maybe it comes up through finance or technology or whatever. Have you seen that, and how does that work? You're on mute. If you had you're on mute in the webinar bingo, you can check that one off.
There you go.
Yeah.
There was a time where there was a big push to pull business continuity within organizational risk management. But I've seen us in finance. I've seen us within a lot in cyber, in information and technology. I think just in general, wherever the best place is for your organization is the best place that we need to be. I would like us to see us be able to cross all of the siloed places to work. But again, as long as you have that champion that is really pushing for business continuity, we'll be successful.
That's a really good point. That executive sponsor, that leadership from the top is super important, really, no matter where you fall in that. All right, as I like to say on the podcast, we'll get you out of here on this. This is for both of you to jump in. I'd like you to offer your thoughts on this. So maybe for someone who's not in our industry, maybe they're in risk or finance or some other part of the business, why should we even be paying attention to resilience right now? Lisa, let's start with you.
Oh boy. I think it's obvious. I mean, if we want to be able to survive, we want our organizations to be able to survive, then we have to be resilient. I think we've taken it for granted, but I think COVID was a blessing and a curse, because COVID showed organizations that were doing their planning, looking at their strategies to be successful, and those companies that didn't pay attention to what they were doing and not having sufficient strategies have really suffered. And as we continue to move to this now normal, we've had supply chain issues and all these other things. Resiliency has just been into the forefront.
Yeah. Ashley?
Yeah, I agree with Lisa. It just makes sense, because if you look at the past few years, it hasn't only been COVID, right? We've had across the globe other multiple incidents, concurrent incidents that have been going on. And that's been one of my biggest concerns, is that we really need resilience to help us to be able to address not only something as ongoing and long as COVID, but also the other events that we continue to experience, whether it's supply chain shortages, whether it's natural disaster events or man-made events. Those all really force the organization to need to come together. And I think just taking this resilience mindset and using it as your organizational resilience, leveraging things like operational resilience, those companies that do that are going to be stronger. And all of that comes back to understanding the risk, right, that we've been talking about. That if you really don't understand the risks to your organization, to your employees, to your customers, to your suppliers, then you really can't be as resilient as you would be if you do have that deep dive understanding. So again, just real natural synergies there to get to that resilient point. You have to understand the risk, and you have to leverage all of the resources inside the organization, like business continuity, like DR, like crisis management, your security teams, your business units, to get that holistic picture that you want. Everyone needs to be trained, at some point, I believe, in what resilience means. And like I said before, it really just resonates. People understand this on a basic level, and it makes sense to them. And it's a much easier sell to say, hey, we want to prepare ahead of time, even though we've done that in the business continuity space. For example, it just makes sense to them. And it just works. It resonates. And everyone wants to be in the resilience camp and not in the recovery camp at the end of the day.
Yes.
Yeah. No, that's the nugget right there. And, for some of you, we might have introduced a new concept here, is to leveraging this risk information as part of your strategies for being more resilient. And we would encourage you to start thinking that way and to try to improve the overall resilience of your organization by being collaborative and working across those different boundaries and out of those silos. All right, so now we'd like to hear from the audience, and hopefully you've been typing in. I don't see them right in front of me, so we'll bring Hind back in, and Hind, let us know if there's any questions or anything we can talk
so
about.
we have a couple questions. Mostly, one of them got 2 upvotes, which is pretty exciting. So I will start with that one. So this is interesting. He said, from Daman Dev Sood, he said, some people say this is old wine in a new bottle. BCM was enough. Resilience, operational resilience, organizational resilience, are these just new buzzwords? Your views, please. Who would like to tackle that one?
I'll go first, but I don't want to go alone. So I like the quote, the old wine in the new bottles. I think it's better wine in better bottles. And so what I mean is, it's one thing to talk about, again, the spare tire. I'm going to go back to the truck analogy. It's one thing to talk about the spare tire, but it's another thing to just have a more intentional approach to being resilient by design as opposed to being recoverable by accident or based on what you hope is the right way to go. So for me, it is absolutely not just a regurgitation of the same thing. Now, I will say this: yes, 100% build on a lot of the same principles, but not isolated to just the old way of doing things. Again, as we've been talking about, collaborating with other business units, pulling in that risk data and understanding things like that makes it, for me, a better wine.
I agree. And just to add on to that, I think one of the benefits of taking a resilience mindset is that you are looking at the whole organization. And I think the challenge or downfall of business continuity, particularly in the past, is that it was very, and someone said this earlier, aligned with audit or aligned with compliance. And that really was the stick, often used for the program. And I think, Lisa, you said the check the box, right? And I think that's been the challenge of business continuity, whereas resilience, I think, as I was just speaking about a few minutes ago, really is understood by people and understood by the business. And I think in today's marketplace, where we're having to adapt and change so quickly, it really makes sense to really embrace this mindset of resilience much more so than being reactive, as we've been talking about.
Yeah, and I would just I would add to that, it allows us to be proactively reactive. So it allows us to put plans in place and really understand what the business needs as opposed to just reacting on that day of disruption. And of course, you'll have to pivot, but it lessens the type of pivot that we need to do. It mitigates and lessens the disruption that may happen. If we're proactive in putting controls in place, already thinking about those things that can happen, when it does happen, there's less disruption. Again, going back to and I'm gonna keep going back into food because I like to eat, but going back to these restaurants where people, their bread and butter was people coming into the restaurant, ordering drinks, that's where they're making their money, and no longer being able to do that. And now we see a lot of storefronts, a lot of restaurants just had to close because they couldn't pivot from having people come in as opposed to takeout and delivery. So yes, it just makes things more proactive.
Just to put a point on that, and going back to the wine analogy. So yeah, I think it's better wine in a better bottle, but it also requires better marketing. We need to talk about it a little bit differently too, and talk about the things that Ashley and Lisa were just talking about. All right, Hind, what's next?
All right, yeah, we are coming up on time, and there are 4 questions here. But I'll go. We'll definitely get the answers to you if we don't have time here.
All right, do a lightning round here. We can do these quick. Let's go.
Yeah, we can
All right, we can do a lightning round for sure. So You did touch on this, Mark, when you went a little bit off script, but can you offer some advice on how we as employees can champion business continuity and resilience in organizations that are a little behind?
Yeah, so for me, it's about building those relationships, uh, building on small wins, gaining momentum, and building that influence. It's so super important to have that executive leadership. The areas that I have worked, and I'm a lifelong consultant, right? So I haven't been an employee outside of my own practice forever. And so I get into a lot of different organizations. And the places that I've been where the programs have been successful are the places where, for example, Rodney Hill over at Omers and other places like that, where we had this strong executive sponsorship. So for me, it starts there and then building those relationships.
And one quick tip that I did, this says, and it had nothing to do with business continuity. I started working out at the gym that the company had and made relationships there. And start talking business continuity. I know in the gym because I did need something to help me get through that. But that's how I was able to make a relationship. That was an odd place to do it, but anytime you can have conversations is always a plus.
I like that.
That's great. All right, so next question. Just trying to get through these before time's out. So should organizations that already have BCM and risk teams have separate resilience teams, or should there be considerations for harmonizing these disciplines and roles?
Put them together wholeheartedly. The more the merrier.
I like
collaboration.
Yeah, not a new team though.
No.
All right. And next, some believe that if BCM is being done right, we wouldn't need to introduce the concepts of operational organizational resilience. Do you agree?
I think you still need operational resilience. I mean, again, our job is really to react to the disruption, but the operational resilience helps us understand that end-to-end process even better. Really to hone our skills and what are those critical functions and what is that thing that's making the money for the organization. So I think you need both.
Yeah, I think just to build on what Lisa was saying, I think organizational resilience is more than just BCM. And so I think that's why it's important to look at it with that holistic lens that we were speaking to throughout this conversation. So, I think if we just keep it in that small bucket, and it's an important bucket, of course, because I'm biased on that. But I think if we just keep it in that small bucket, it again is not going to get as much traction or ownership within the organization as really trying to make it meaningful and bringing that full return on investment or return on value to the organization as a whole, to think about it from all aspects. And that's really tying in, we didn't talk about this, but it really means that you're tying in to the overall objectives and goal of your business. And that's something that not all BCM programs or practitioners have been particularly good at doing in the past. And we definitely need to get better. And I think embracing both these concepts of understanding risk to bringing resilience to the organization helps us to do that in a much better way than we always have been able to do before.
Well, I'm going to try out another analogy. I'm going to say this. It would be like saying if we had good doctors, we'd never have to worry about being sick. Or I would look at it this way. I'd say, no, it's not the same. A resilient approach is like having a more healthy lifestyle, where going to the doctor is great. That would be maybe the business continuity plan because I was sick and I had to go to the doctor. But resilience would be, no, I'm going to live a more healthy life and be more intentional about that so that maybe I don't have to go to the doctor as often. And that's how I see it. I got to work on these analogies, man. I don't know.
I love it though. That was a good one. That was a little better. A little better. A little better. Go ahead.
All right. Good.
That was great.
Let me just throw this out. We're all about connecting with people. This was very popular, by the way, during the Super Bowl. There was the ad about the QR code. I don't know if you saw that or not. But feel free to grab that and join us on LinkedIn. We also have a website. You can follow us on Twitter. But we'd love to hear from you.
All right. There was one more question. We will send out the answer to that in follow-up, but I think it's time to wrap up today. I just want to thank everyone for joining us here today. Thank you for our panelists. This was a great discussion, and we look